everyone. Thanks for coming. As Alex mentioned, my name is Lara Aknin, and I'm an assistant professor of social psychology at Fraser University. But I'm also a wife, a mom to an extremely handsome English bulldog, and a big sister to this big fella, my baby brother, Josh. Now, years ago, when Josh and I were little, we used to spend a lot of time playing games together. And while I like to think that I was a kind big sister, I have a striking memory of a nasty game I used to play on my brother back when he was less of a physically threatening force. And this game wasn't so much a game as it was a trick, which involved me telling Josh that nickels were worth more than dimes because coins were valued based on their size. And now, to make my case, I pointed towards consistent and familiar evidence. For instance, I reminded Josh that loonies are bigger than quarters and also worth more. Josh agreed. Similarly, I reminded him that quarters are bigger than nickels and also worth more. Josh agreed. So then I went on to tell him that it followed obviously that because nickels were bigger than dimes, they were also worth more. Luckily for me, Josh agreed, so I traded him handfuls of nickels for dimes, essentially doubling my worth, which was probably $4 at the time, and marched straight down the street to the corner store to buy bags of penny candy, because I thought that would make me happy. Now, why do I tell you this story? Well, it's not to illustrate that I'm a bad person or a terrible big sister, but to illustrate that there are times when we as human beings act in selfish ways to further our own self-interest. Here, I lied to my baby brother to earn extra cash because I wanted to buy myself something that I thought would make me happy. I acted in accordance with what some might call my selfish genes and tried to improve my stake at the cost of someone else. But does this childish tale of trickery, deceit, and sugar sum up our human existence? Well, I would argue that no, it doesn't. So every day we can look around the world around us and see kind acts both large and small. So for instance, an extreme example might be the actions of Ken Taylor, the Canadian ambassador to Iran who sheltered 6 US diplomats during the hostile takeover and revolution in 1980. And while Taylor's actions are extremely heroic, we can see smaller scale acts every day, from the surprise bouquet of flowers we get from our friends or our spouse, to the free cup of coffee left for us at a local Tim Hortons, which I did not receive today, but I haven't purchased a coffee, so maybe that's why. Anyway, the point is that small acts of giving and kindness are indeed all around us. And in my brief time with you today, I'd like to argue that these acts of kindness are not just good for the recipient, as we might suspect, but that helping others can actually increase our own well-being. So I started off studying this question during my graduate studies while working with Elizabeth Dunn and Mike Norton, trying to investigate how people can kind of gain the most happiness from their everyday spending choices. And starting off in investigating this question, Liz, Mike, and myself conducted a large nationally representative survey of over 600 Americans, and we asked them to tell us 2 separate pieces of information. First, we asked for information about how much they spend in an average month on 4 spending categories. So the first was their expenses, rent, bills, and debt. The second was gifts for themselves. The third was gifts for others. And the fourth was donations to charity. We also asked people to tell us how happy they were on a 1-item happiness scale. Now, to get an idea of how much money people spent on themselves and others in an average month, we summed together these 4 spending categories into 2 spending indices. So what I mean by that is we created an index of what I'll call personal spending, by summing together how much money people spent on expenses, rent, bills, and debt, along with gifts for themselves, telling how much went to themselves. And similarly, we created an index of what I'll call pro-social spending, which is how much money people put in an average month towards others, so for donations to charity or gifts to other people. Then we simply asked, how do these 2 spending indices relate to people's well-being? Well, we did some pretty simple statistics and came up with some pretty striking results. What we found was, first and foremost, how much money people spent on themselves in an average month was pretty much unrelated to their own well-being. So pouring tons of money into gifts for yourself or your own everyday expenses didn't seem to really pay off in terms of happiness. Interestingly, however, how much money people spend on others did indeed predict their happiness, such that spending more on others was associated with higher levels of happiness. And I should note that this was true across the income spectrum. So this suggests that how much money we spend on others might be associated with higher levels of happiness. But to find out whether giving or spending on others actually causes higher levels of happiness, we followed up with an experiment in which I went out in the morning hours on campus, recruited a bunch of students, and gave them an envelope with either a $5 or $20 bill that they were told they had to spend that day. Now, half of the students were told to put this money towards something for themselves. So they were told to cover a bill, expense, or go out and buy themselves a gift. The other half were told that they had to use this money for someone else. So they had to put it towards a gift for someone else or a donation to charity. Now, importantly, everybody was told to spend the money by 5 o'clock so that a research assistant could call them in the evening and find out how they were feeling. So what did we find? Well, we found that people who were randomly assigned to spend money on others were significantly happier at the end of the day. Here, it was regardless of whether they were spending $5 or $20, those who spent on others were happier. Now, an important question I think we can raise from this is whether these findings I've reported so far are something that might be unique to North America, where a number of people might report having extra disposable income that they can choose to spend on others. But what happens if we go to other countries and cultures around the world where people might have less money to spend and might presumably get the most benefit from spending on themselves? Well, to address this question, I partnered with an international collaborative team and a fantastic economist who you'll hear from later, John. And we went to countries, we collected a sample of data from Canada, a relatively rich nation, but also from a relatively poor sample in South Africa. And all of these participants came into the lab, they were asked to fill out some questionnaires, and they were told that in exchange for the time, they had earned an additional study payment that they could use to buy a goodie bag filled with treats like chocolate or juice. Now, half of the students were told that these goodie bags would be for them and available for pickup at the conclusion of the experiment, but the other half were told that their goodie bag would be donated to a sick kid at a local children's hospital. Now, everybody had the option to opt in or opt out of purchasing this goodie bag, but almost everybody decided to purchase it. And then we asked them, how are you feeling afterward? Well, what we found was the same as what we had seen in North America before. People who were randomly assigned to use their money to purchase a goodie bag for someone else were happier than those who were assigned to buy the same goodie bag for themselves. Now, this is true even though participants who were giving the goodie bag away, essentially, had no contact with their recipient. And importantly, this was true both in Canada, where a large proportion of our students reported that they had extra disposable income, but also in South Africa, where a sizable proportion of our sample reported difficulty securing food for themselves and their family in the past 12 months. So looking beyond Canada and South Africa, we were able to analyze data from over 230,000 participants in 136 countries by looking at data from the Gallup World Poll. And what we did was ask a simple and similar question, which is whether donating money to charity in the last month is associated with higher levels of happiness. What we found was similar to what we had seen before, such that in 88% of the countries surveyed, we found a positive relationship between donating money to charity and happiness. Now, these findings can actually be seen in this world map here, where countries shown in green indicate a positive relationship between donating money to charity and happiness, while countries shown in red indicate a negative relationship. The darker the color, the stronger the relationship, and as you can see, the world is mainly green, suggesting a pervasive link between giving and happiness around the world. All right, so by now I've hopefully started to convince you that giving to others has measurable and observable benefits for our own well-being. But at what age do we as human beings start to find giving rewarding? Well, there's some new research emerging that indicating that young kids like to begin engaging in sharing behavior and helpful behavior spontaneously, and they start to do so quite early in life. As early as 18 months, young kids are offering to help other people, and in fact, sometimes they'll do it when it involves some act of self-sacrifice, such as getting up and walking away from a fun game to go help someone in need. Now, why are young kids engaging in this potentially costly helping behavior? Well, I'd like to argue that just like the adults I've been talking about so far, young kids might also feel good about giving. So to test this question, I partnered with a developmental psychologist, Kylie Hamlin, and Elizabeth Dunn, another social psychologist, to explore this question. And what we did was we recruited a sample of 20 toddlers just under the age of 2, and we asked them to come into the lab with a parent or a caregiver, and they were seated across the table from an experimenter who introduced them to a puppet named Monkey, who was a monkey, and they were told that Monkey liked eating treats. Then each child was given their own little plastic bowl and 8 edible treats, stuff that kids really like goldfish crackers or Teddy Graham crackers. Then over the next few minutes, each kid was taken through a series of giving stages, if you will. First, they were asked to watch as the experimenter gave a treat to Monkey. Then they were asked to give one of the experimenter's treats to Monkey. And finally, they were asked to give one of their own treats to Monkey. Now, every time Monkey received a treat, he ate it in a large and very showy way. So he leaned forward, shoved his face in the bowl, and went, mmm, and appeared to eat the treat. Now, obviously, you as adults know that a stuffed animal monkey can't consume a treat, but we convinced the kids that he could by pushing the treat through a false bottom corner in the bowl, making it disappear, making it look as if Monkey had actually eaten the treat. And we wanted to know how the kids responded to these different giving and receiving opportunities, so we captured their expressions on videotape and later coded their faces for how much happiness was present or to what extent they were smiling. We, of course, were interested in whether kids were happier giving treats away than they were when receiving treats, and whether the emotional benefits of giving might differ on account of whether they were giving their own food or food that kind of belonged to the experimenter. So what did we find? Well, first and foremost, we found that kids did smile more when giving treats away to others than they did when receiving treats themselves. And this was true both when they gave a treat that belonged to the experimenter or when they gave an identical treat from their own stash. But what's even more exciting is that kids smiled much larger or showed more happiness, if you will, when they gave away their own treat than when they gave away the same identical treat that belonged to the experimenter. So this might suggest that giving is actually especially rewarding when it involves some act of self-sacrifice. All right, so the simple take-home message I'd like to leave you with today is that giving to others can actually promote our own well-being. But before I say goodbye or before I conclude, I'd just like to address the very real possibility that some of you are sitting here thinking, well, that's all well and good, but I kind of had an intuition about this to begin with. I may have not had slides or a PowerPoint available to make my case, but I've been thinking about this too. And well, to that I say kudos, good for you. But it turns out we've asked a large sample of over 100 adults to tell us their predictions on the matter. And when we do so, we find that the significant majority seem to think that they'll get larger emotional rewards from spending on themselves than on others. Now, in a weird way, this makes me feel a little bit better because it suggests my 8-year-old self wasn't some deviant who thought that stealing money from her brother to buy candy for herself would make her happier. I wasn't alone, is the point I was saying. Most adults seem to hold a similar intuition that spending money on themselves will make them happier. However, what I think is better news is that armed with a little bit of knowledge, we can correct these intuitions. So little me is all grown up, and I've learned my lesson. And now I know that if happiness is really what I'm after, rather than steal my brother's money to buy myself candy, it would be oh so much sweeter to give him some. So that's exactly what I've done. Thank you.